بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى أن رآه استغنى. إن إلى ربك الرجعى. أرأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى. أرأيت إن كان على الهدى أو أمر بالتقوى. أرأيت إن كذب وتولى. ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى. كلا لئن لم ينته لنسفعا بالناصية. ناصية كاذبة خاطعة. فليدع ناديا. سندع الزبانية. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Our next program will be tomorrow at 7:30, but we also have a program for the third Imam Wiladat on Monday, February 12th, as well as Hazrat Abbas Wiladat on Tuesday, February 13th, and then fourth Imam Wiladat will be on Thursday, February 14th, inshallah. If I can ask everyone to please recite 3 louder salawat to welcome Sheikh Azhar Nasser. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. How are you?
You brought up the yellow shirt today. Yes. So I can't miss you. صل على محمد وآله. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Before we begin, we'll just spend a few minutes going through some of the ahkam in the Risala Amaliyya of Sayyid al-Sistani. We've been looking at the list of the muharramat that constitute some of the major sins. And we left off at, we spoke about the prohibition of using vulgar language and crude language. And we gave some examples of that. And then the next list on the muharramat is al-ghadru wal-khiyana hatta ma'a ghayr al-muslimin. The next major sin that is listed is betrayal and treachery, even if it is with non-Muslims. Islam emphasizes the importance of being trustworthy and upholding and honoring your promises. If you're entrusted with something, if you contract a treaty, a truce, if there is some sort of agreement between you and another person, whether that other person is a non-Muslim, you're not allowed to betray that trust. In fact, we have a narration from Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam, where the Imam alayhi salam, he says, لو أن قاتل أبي الحسين alayhi salam, he says, if the killer of my father entrusted me, ائتمنني على السيف الذي قتله به لأديته إليه. The Imam says, if the killer of my father, if Shimr, for example, if he entrusted me with the dagger that he used to kill my father, the Imam alayhi salam is saying that if I were to accept that amana, Imam says I would have returned that trust to the killer of my father. So this shows you trustworthiness is an important virtue in Islam. You are not allowed to betray another human being. You're not allowed to renege on your promises and your oaths. The next on the list of the muharramat is al-hasad, envy. He says, al-hasadu ma'a idhari atharihi biqawlin aw fi'l. Now, envy is something that is related to the heart. Envy and jealousy is felt in the heart. Now, to feel jealous is not a sin. It's a negative quality. It's a vice that should be purged. But it becomes a sin if the envy is expressed through word or through action. You know, you say something insulting out of that feeling of jealousy. Or you hurt someone, or you create some problems for another person because of those jealous feelings that you have. So to act on that jealousy is a sin. But if someone, for example, feels in their heart, they're jealous, they can't help it. To feel jealousy in your heart is not a sin. It's a negative quality, it's a vice, it's a negative character trait, but it's not a sin. It's only a sin if it is expressed. If that envy leads you to say something that is hurtful or damaging, or it leads you to do something that is hurtful or damaging. وَلَا بَأْسَ بِالْغِبْطَةِ. So you have jealousy and envy, and then you have another term which is called ghibta. We can say that hasad is a negative type of jealousy, whereby you hope that that person is deprived of that blessing or that perceived blessing. Ghibta is when you are jealous of what has been given to someone, but you don't want them to be deprived of it. You simply want what they have. And that's why if you look at some of the ziyarat, when we address Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, we say that on the Day of Judgment, all of the martyrs will be envious of his high status. Now that doesn't mean that they want his status to be diminished. This ghibta is to desire a blessing that Allah has conferred upon others without wishing that they are deprived of it. This is ghibta. That's a positive type of jealousy. So jealousy, hasad, is only a sin if it is expressed through a person's words or a person's deeds. If it is not, if it remains in the heart, it's not a sin. However, a person should strive to rid and to cleanse their hearts of those ill feelings. وَصَلُّوا عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Respected scholars, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight is the eve of the 27th of Rajab. It's a very blessed night. In fact, we have a narration mentioned by Sheikh al-Tusi in Misbah al-Mutahajjid. And Misbah al-Mutahajjid was basically the Mafatih al-Jinan of the people of the past. So Mafatih al-Jinan is the most popular book of dua, but Misbah al-Mutahajjid by Sheikh al-Tusi used to be a book that was referred to by the Shi'as, and it was written by the Marja of the time, Sheikh al-Tusi, Sheikh al-Ta'if. He reports a narration from Imam al-Jawad, our ninth Imam, alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, إِنَّ فِي رَجَبْ لَيْلَةً هِيَ خَيْرٌ لِلنَّاسِ مِمَّا طَلَعَتْ عَلَيْهِ الشَّمْسِ. Imam al-Jawad, he says, there is an eve, there is a night in the month of Rajab that is better for people than the entire world and everything in it. It's better than anything that the sun shines upon. وَهِيَ لَيْلَةُ السَّابِعِ وَالْعِشْرِينَ مِنْ. And the Imam says, and that night is the night of the 27th of Rajab. And then the Imam says, this is the night in which Nubuwah, the gift, the blessing of Nubuwah was given to the Prophet. His prophetic mission began. وَإِنَّ لِلْعَامِلِ فِيهَا مِنْ شِيعَتِنَا مِثْلُ أَجْرِ عَمَلِ 60 سَنَةً. Imam al-Jawad, he says, for our followers, whatever they do in this night, they will be rewarded as if they did it for 60 consecutive years. So for example, if you pray Salatul Layl tonight, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah, He will reward you as though you prayed Salatul Layl consecutively for 60 years. If you read some Quran, you read a surah of the Quran, Allah rewards you as though you read that surah for 60 consecutive years. Charity, dua, whatever you do on this night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He amplifies the reward. And the reward is quite close to the reward that Allah gives on Laylatul Qadr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about Laylatul Qadr, Laylatul Qadr khayrun min alf shahr. Laylatul Qadr is better than 1,000 months. 1,000 months is about a little bit over 80 years. What you do tonight is equivalent to 60 years. So in terms of the hierarchy of the holy nights, this night is among the holiest of the nights of the year. Now, what happened on this night? Oftentimes, what is advertised is not very accurate. We say that this is the night in which we celebrate the Mab'ath and the Mi'raj, right? The two M's, the Mab'ath and the Mi'raj. When you look at the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, you find that there is no mention of the Mi'raj happening on this night. This is based on a hadith found in Sunni sources that is deemed weak by most Sunni ulama. So unfortunately what has happened is that many of us, we've kind of adopted some of the practices of non-Shi'i communities without really looking at what the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have said. Now, the Mi'raj, according to Imam al-Sadiq, happened more than once. In fact, we have narrations from Ahlul Bayt, from Imam al-Sadiq, that say the Prophet went on 120 ascensions. One of them is mentioned in the Quran, Isra and Mi'raj. You have the horizontal journey and the vertical journey. And hence, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly when Mi'raj took place. But we don't have any reports from Ahlul Bayt that say the 27th of Rajab is the night of Mi'raj and we should do a'mal in honor of Mi'raj. They say this is the night of Mab'ath. And the a'mal that we do on this night is to honor the Mab'ath of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. Now, in the limited time that I have, what I'd like to do tonight is I want to compare and contrast what the Prophet experienced when revelation descended upon him. How did the Prophet react and respond in Ghar Hira when Wahi descended upon him? I want to present to you a narration in Bukhari which represents the dominant Sunni narrative on how the Prophet ﷺ responded to revelation, the first revelation. And then we will look at what Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have said. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is the narration that I'm going to share with you from Sahih al-Bukhari, which is a story that probably most of us heard growing up about what happened to the Prophet when Jibreel descended upon him. This hadith is probably one of the most dangerous ahadith in the Islamic hadith corpus. Why? Because the hadith based on the Sunni version is a narration that is used by almost every critic of Islam who wishes to discredit the legitimacy of the nubuwwah of the Prophet. Because when you go through the story, and we'll go through the story, there are some major theological problems in this narration that if we say that this is actually what happened, it casts doubt on the very prophethood of Rasulullah. Now, so we'll mention what is the narration in Bukhari, and then we'll see what Amir al-Mu'mineen and Imam al-Sadiq and the family of the Prophet say about what did the Prophet, about how the Prophet responded to revelation when it descended upon him. Now, the narration that I'll share with you is from the first book, the first section in Sahih al-Bukhari. If you go online and you look up Bukhari, if you go to sunnah.com, you'll see Sahih al-Bukhari, you click on it, and it gives you the different books. And books basically means chapters. The first book, the first section is Kitabu Bad'il Wahi, the book on the beginning of revelation. If you scroll down, it's probably the third hadith or so. The hadith is from Aisha. Now, what does the hadith say? An Aisha al-Mu'mineen, it says al-Mu'mineen, أنها قالت. She then starts to tell the story about what happened to the Prophet in Ghar Hira when revelation descended upon him. Now, right here, if someone is a hadith scholar, right from the get-go, there's a red flag. What is the red flag? Aisha is not saying, Rasulullah told me that this is what happened. She is narrating it, but she's not telling us who her source is. And why is it important that we note here that she's not telling us the source? Because she wasn't born at the time. She was born after the Mab'ath. So who is feeding her this story? Now someone say, oh, obviously she's narrating from the Prophet. But she didn't say the Prophet said this to her. She is reporting the narration without telling us who her source is. She was not an eyewitness. She was not even alive at the time. That's number one. So she says, قالت أول ما بدأ به رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله من الوحي الرؤيا الصالحة في النوم. She says, before revelation came down, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to see dreams that would come true. Right? And we also affirm this, and this is also mentioned in our hadith, that before Jibreel appeared, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to see visions in his dreams. He would see Jibreel even in his dreams. He would see angels. So she says, فَكَانَ لَا يَرَى رُؤْيًا إِلَّا جَاءَتْ مِثْلَ فَلَقِ الصُّبْحِ. She says any dream that he had, it would come true. The dream would be like a prophecy. And any time that he dreamed about something, it would come to fruition. It would be manifested in reality. As clear as the daybreak. ثم حبب إليه الخلاء. She says the Prophet then developed a love for seclusion. He enjoyed being alone. وكان يخلو بغار حراء فيتحنث فيه. The Prophet, she says, Aisha says that the Prophet loved seclusion. And he used to retreat to a mountain, and there was a cave in that mountain that he enjoyed. It gave him kind of a bird's eye view of the valley of Mecca. He would go there and he would worship. الليالي ذوات العدد قبل أن ينزع إلى أهله. He would stay there for many days. Many days he would stay up there. And then ويتزود لذلك ثم يرجع إلى خديجة فيتزود لمثلها. The Prophet would take food with him, he would take provisions, he would go up to Ghar Hira, he would stay there for many days until he runs out of food, and then he would come down, he would take more food from Khadija, and then he would go back. He spent a lot of time in solitude. حتى جاء الحق وهو في غار حراء, until revelation descended upon him while he was in Ghar Hira. So again, I'm reading it to you verbatim, the narration in Sahih al-Bukhari, in the section on the beginning of Revelation. So up until now, everything is fine. As followers of Ahlul Bayt, we have no contention with anything that has been mentioned so far, except for, of course, what I mentioned in the beginning, that Aisha is speaking about what happened to the Prophet in Ghar Hira, but the problem is, you were born after Mab'ath. So who's your source? In any case, حتى جاءه الحق وهو في غار حراء فجاء الملك. An angel appeared to the Prophet. فقال اقرأ. The angel appeared and said to the Prophet, read. اقرأ. He says, according to Bukhari, according to Aisha's narration, ما أنا بقارئ. He says, I cannot read. I'm illiterate. I cannot read. قال فأخذني فغطني حتى بلغ مني الجهد. Jibreel, the angel, says to the Prophet, read. And the Prophet says, I cannot read. Now what's confusing here is, did the angel present something that was written? Because we don't have any ahadith that say Jibreel came down with a scroll and said, Iqra. Iqra in Arabic, depending on the context, it could mean read the print, the text, or recite. So, because Jibreel doesn't have a scroll with him, it doesn't make sense that the Prophet would say, I'm illiterate. Well, there's nothing in front of you to say that I cannot read this writing. So again, there's an issue here. فَغَطَّنِي, when the Prophet said, I cannot read, the hadith says the angel enveloped him. If you look at the commentaries say that Jibreel squeezed him. Now, if someone is telling you that I cannot read, why is an angel of God being so aggressive and harsh with a man who is destined to be a prophet? If he's saying, I cannot read, why pressure him and squeeze him? And in fact, one narrator says the angel choked the Prophet. Allahu Akbar. If this happened in BC schools, this person would be under arrest for abusing a student. The hadith says the angel squeezed and pressurized the Prophet ﷺ. فَأَخَذَنِي فَغَطَّنِي الثَّانِيَةِ. He was squeezed once and then released. Iqra. Again, the Prophet says, I cannot read. Does the angel let him go? Does the angel have rahmah, mercy on him? No. Another squeeze. He was squeezed twice. حَتَّى بَلَغَ مِنِّي الْجَهْدِ ثُمَّ أَرْسَلَنِي. Then I was released again. فَقَالَ اقْرَأ فَقُلْتُ مَا أَنَا بِقَارِئ فَأَخَذَنِي فَغَطَّنِي الثَّالِثَةِ. And then he was squeezed a third time. Allahu Akbar. What kind of abuse is this? A man is saying that I am illiterate. Of course, we don't accept this. I cannot read. Squeezed by the angel 3 times. ثُمَّ أَرْسَلَنِي فَقَالْ اقْرَأْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ. And then the ayat of Surah Al-Alaq were revealed. The hadith then says, فَرَجَعَ بِهَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ. آلِ is from me. يَرْجُفُ فُؤَادُهُ. The Prophet then came down. He came down from the mountain and his heart was trembling. فَدَخَلَ عَلَى خَدِيجَةَ بِنْتِ خُوَيْلِدٍ. Until he entered upon, he basically went home, came down from the mountain, he's trembling, his heart is trembling, he comes down, he goes to Khadija. فَقَالْ زَمِّلُونِي زَمِّلُونِي. The Prophet rushes into the room, he says to Khadija, cover me, cover me. فَزَمَّلُوهُ حَتَّى ذَهَبَ عَنْهُ الرَّوْحِ. She covered him until the fear had subsided. فَقَالَ لِخَدِيجَةَ وَأَخْبَرَهَا الْخَبَرِ. The Prophet told Khadija what happened to him on the mountain. The hadith says, she told him what happened. He told Khadija what happened. And then he said to her, لَقَدْ خَشِيتُ عَلَى نَفْسِي. The hadith in Bukhari says that the Prophet says to Khadija, I fear for myself. I'm afraid. I'm afraid about what's happening to me. So he says, I fear for myself. فَقَالَتْ خَدِيجَةُ كَلَّا وَاللَّهِ. No, there's nothing to fear. وَاللَّهِ مَا يُخْزِيكَ اللَّهُ أَبَدًا. Allah would never disgrace you. إِنَّكَ لَتَصِلُ الرَّحِمِ. You maintain ties with your family, with your nearest of kin. وَتَحْمِلُ الْكَلِّ وَتَكْسِبُ الْمَعْدُومِ وَتَقْرِ الضَّيْفِ. You look after the poor, you honor your guests. وَتُعِينُ عَلَى نَوَائِبِ الْحَقِّ. You help those who are in need, who are calamity-stricken. So she basically tries to reassure the Prophet that you're not a bad person. Allah would never disgrace you. Rasulullah says, I'm afraid, I fear for myself. I don't know what's happening to me. She tries to comfort him. So up until now in the hadith, the Prophet doesn't know what happened to him. He's clueless about what has happened. فانطلقت به خديجة حتى أتت به ورقة بن نوفل. The hadith says, Khadija decides to take her husband to Waraqa ibn Nawfal, her cousin. وَكَانَ امْرَأً تَنَصَّرَ فِي الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. He had converted to Christianity. He was a Christian. وَكَانَ يَكْتُبُ الْكِتَابَ الْعِبْرَانِي. He was able to write Hebrew, so he had knowledge of the scriptures. فَيَكْتُبُ مِنَ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِالْعِبْرَانِيَّةِ. He would write the Bible in Hebrew. فانطلقت به خديجة حتى أتت به ورقة. So she takes him to Waraqa. وكان شيخا كبيرا قد عمي. He was an elderly man who had gone blind. فقالت له خديجة يا ابن عم اسمع من ابن أخيك. Oh cousin, listen to what happened to my husband. Let Muhammad tell you what happened to him. So the Prophet tells Waraqa what happened. فقال له ورقة هذا الناموس الذي نزل الله على موسى. Waraqa tells the Prophet, "Oh Muhammad, don't worry. That was Jibreel. The same Jibreel that came to Musa." Now what's shocking about this hadith is Rasulullah doesn't know. He needs a Christian to tell him that this is Jibreel. Based on this hadith, the entire nubuwwah of Rasulullah is based on the testimony of Waraqa ibn Nawfal. What made Rasulullah believe that this being that appeared to him was Jibreel was not the Prophet's own conviction. It had to be confirmed by Waraqa. This is number one. And then Waraqa ibn Nawfal, he says, "Ya laytani fiha jad'a, laytani akunu hayyan idh yukhrijuka qawmuk." If only I was a young man. If only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept me alive long enough so that I could witness your rise and see the day that your people expel you. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله أمخرجيهم. Are my people going to expel me from my city? And Waraqa says, نعم لم يأتي رجل قط بمثل ما جئت به إلا عودي. O Muhammad, there is not a single man in the past who has brought a message like yours to his people unless they were expelled, unless they faced hostility and adversity. And then look at what he says. He says, وَإِنْ يُدْرِكْنِي يَوْمُكَ أَنْصُرُكَ نَصْرًا مُؤَزَّرًا. If Allah allows me to witness that day, I will support you. And then Waraqa dies a few days later. Question: why didn't Waraqa convert? If Waraqa is saying that you're a prophet of God, you're a messenger of God, Jibreel came to you just as he came to Musa, why did he not embrace and say, I bear witness that you are a messenger of God? He dies upon Christianity. Now, from this hadith, we understand, and there's a continuation, and I'll share it with you in a few moments. The hadith in Bukhari that goes through the story of the first revelation is a narration by Aisha, who was not alive during the time of the Mab'ath. And she does not say, the Prophet told me that this happened to him. She's narrating the incident without identifying who her source is. Secondly, the one who's narrating this hadith is essentially saying that wahi is something that is confusing and ambiguous. When it's happening to you, you don't know what's happening. The Prophet comes down from the mountain, terrified, perplexed, puzzled, is questioning his own sanity. I fear for myself. Khadija has to comfort him. Everyone knows what happened to him except the Prophet. She takes him to Waraqa. Waraqa says, no, you are a prophet. If my salvation hinges upon my submission to the fact that Rasulullah is a messenger of God, if Allah expects me to have yaqeen, certainty that Muhammad is a messenger, how is it fair for me to have certainty when Muhammad ibn Abdullah himself wasn't certain? How can it be expected of a Muslim to be certain that Muhammad ibn Abdullah was chosen as a messenger of God if Muhammad ibn Abdullah himself, according to this hadith, was confused? And a Christian monk has to tell him, you're not losing your mind, it was Jibreel. The Prophet himself doubted his own nubuwwah. So you see, and every hadith that every debate that I have seen between Muslims and non-Muslims, this hadith is brought up to prove that, listen, your own Prophet was unsure about what was happening to him. Now, if you go to Bukhari, to the section called Kitab al-Ta'bir, which is the section on the interpretation of dreams, there's a continuation of this hadith. And the hadith says what? After Waraqa passes away, وَفَتَرَ الْوَحْيُ فَتْرَةً حَتَّى حَزِنَ النَّبِيُّ. After the initial revelation of the verses of Surah Al-Alaq, revelation was suspended. Jibreel was not appearing. There were no more verses of the Quran that were being revealed to the Prophet. So the hadith says revelation stopped and the Prophet felt sad. He became depressed. فَحَزِنَ النَّبِيُّ sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Again, ali is from me. بَلَغَنَا فِيمَا بَلَغَنَا حزن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله فيما بلغنا حزنا غدا منه مرارا كي يتردى من رؤوس شواهك الجبال. When revelation stopped, the Prophet was saddened. He climbs up to the peaks of the mountains around Mecca. To do what? To throw himself from the mountains. The narration in Bukhari is saying that when revelation stopped, the Prophet felt sad. He felt depressed. He would climb the mountains to throw himself off of the mountain, to commit suicide, basically. فَكُلَّمَا أَوْفَى بِذِرْوَةِ جَبَلٍ لِكَيْ يُلْقِيَ مِنْهُ نَفْسَ تَبَدَّى لَهُ جِبْرِيلٌ. Whenever the Prophet was about to throw himself from the cliff, Jibreel would appear. And what would Jibreel say? Ya Muhammad, innaka Rasulullahi haqqa. Oh Muhammad, you are really a prophet of God. Don't commit suicide. You are really a prophet of God. فَيَسْكُنُ لِذَلِكَ جَأْشُهُ وَتَقِرُّ نَفْسُهُ. The Prophet would then feel content. He would feel tranquility. فَإِذَا طَالَتْ عَلَيْهِ فَتْرَةُ الْوَحْيِ. And when it happened again, that revelation would be suspended, again, the Prophet would go up to the mountains to throw himself off of the mountain. And again, Jibreel would say to him again, "O Muhammad, I promise you, you are a prophet of God." And and then he would come down. I ask you, brothers and sisters, is this how we speak of the last messenger of God? Whereby he is portrayed as an individual who is not mentally stable, where he, according to this hadith that I just read in Bukhari, he makes multiple attempts to end his own life. This is why, my dear brothers and sisters, it is important for Muslims to take the teachings of their religion from those who knew the Prophet the best. Because if you don't take the teachings of Islam from Ahlul Bayt, this is the type of prophet you end up with. A distorted portrayal of the Prophet. Now, when you look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appointed many prophets. Why is it that no prophet before Rasulullah ever tried to commit suicide? Why is it that, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to Musa, when he went to Mount Sinai, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed himself. Ya Musa, innahu ana Allah. Did Musa try to throw himself off of the mountain? Was Musa confused about what was happening to him? وَأَنَا اخْتَرْتُكَ فَاسْتَمِعْ لِمَا يُوحَى. Allah says to Musa, I have chosen you. Does the Quran say that when Musa came down from the mountain, when he was appointed as a prophet, that he was confused and he had to ask his wife, what is happening to me? Those who say that the Prophet ﷺ was confused, they simply do not understand what revelation is. For those who say that the Prophet ﷺ, he was shocked and this was something totally unexpected. Yes, that's because they're getting their Islam from other than Ahlul Bayt. Let me share with you a statement from Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi. In Nahj al-Balagha, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he speaks about the Prophet and what was happening to him up to that moment, leading up to that moment in the cave. He says, وَلَقَدْ قَرَنَ اللَّهُ بِهِ مِنْ لَدُنْ أَنْ كَانَ فَطِيمًا أَعْظَمَ مَلَكٍ مِنْ مَلَائِكَتِهِ. You think Rasulullah just suddenly saw Jibreel in a cave when he was 40? Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coupled the Prophet with the greatest of his angels from the moment he was weaned. Meaning, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says from the age of 2, because the weaning ends at 2. In Nahj al-Balagha, Ali, he says, from the age of 2 until the age of 40, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he already had the greatest of angels with him, accompanying him. Doing what? يَسْلُكُ بِهِ طَرِيقَ الْمَكَارِمِ. This angel would guide the Prophet to the most noble conduct. In fact, we have narrations that say that when the Prophet was young and he was playing with some of the younger boys, some of the boys would remove their shirts. They were playing. And the ahadith say that when the Prophet was about to remove his shirt, the angel would say, "Oh Muhammad, do not remove your shirt." Not because it's a sin, but because even from a young age, he was being guided to not do anything that would diminish his dignity. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says that there was an angel assigned to the Prophet from the day that he was weaned. And then the Imam says, he says, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ يُجَاوِرُ فِي كُلِّ سَنَةٍ بِحِرَاءٍ. The Imam says, every year, the Prophet would dedicate some time and he would worship in that cave. فَأَرَاهُ وَلَا يَرَاهُ غَيْرِي. I would be there with him. I would see him while there was no one other than me who would see him. When Aisha reports what happened in Ghar Hira, she was not born. We don't know what her source is. Ali is saying that I was there. I used to go with him in Ghar Hira. And then the Imam says, وَلَمْ يَجْمَعْ بَيْتٌ وَاحِدٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ غَيْرَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَخَدِيجَ وَأَنَا ثَالِثُهُمَا. The Imam says, there was a time when Islam was only comprised of three people. Rasulullah, Khadija, and I was the third of them. It's a shame that this Ali, who was there from the beginning, he's treated as, someone, he's just one of the Sahaba. Imam says, I was there when he used to worship in that cave. And then look at what the Imam says. أرى نور الوحي والرسالة وأشم ريح النبوة. The Imam says, I was there. I could see the light of revelation and I could smell the fragrance of prophethood. Ali is saying that it was obvious to me. You're saying Rasulullah came down and he's confused and he has to go to a Christian monk to verify that he's not losing his mind. And I'll conclude with this. Zurara ibn A'yan, one of the companions of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi alayhi, he says to the Imam, so this is during the time of Imam al-Sadiq, he says, كيف لم يخف رسول الله فيما يأتيه من قبل الله أن يكون مما ينزغ به الشيطان. Zurara, he says to Imam al-Sadiq, how did the Prophet know? Wasn't the Prophet afraid that maybe what he saw when he was in that cave was from the whispers of Satan? And this shows you that this was a common belief among Muslims even during the time of Imam al-Sadiq. This idea of a confused prophet, a prophet who doesn't know what happened to him in that cave, and then later on, after much convincing, he finally accepted that I'm a messenger of God. So Zurara is asking Imam al-Sadiq that how did the Prophet know that this was revelation and not satanic whispers? Imam al-Sadiq, he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ إِذَا اتَّخَذَ عَبْدًا رَسُولًا أَنزَلَ عَلَيْهِ السَّكِينَةَ وَالْوِقَارَ. Imam says, when Allah chooses someone as a messenger or a prophet, He puts tranquility in their hearts. They know what's happening. He puts sakina in their hearts. Because how can you send a prophet who's supposed to guide people if he is not sure about what's happening to him? So Imam says when Allah chooses a prophet, He infuses tranquility and serenity in their hearts. فَكَانَ الَّذِي يَأْتِيهِ مِنْ قِبَلِ اللَّهِ مِثْلُ الَّذِي يَرَاهُ بِعَيْنِهِ. Imam al-Sadiq, he says, when Allah reveals something to a prophet, it is not ambiguous. It is as clear as the things that you see in front of your eyes. Imam is saying what? That those who say Rasulullah was confused, they simply do not understand what revelation is. Revelation is an uncovering of reality. It's not a blurring of reality, Imam al-Sadiq is saying. So therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, on this night, we are celebrating the greatest ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And that is the ni'mah of guidance through the Prophet who, when he received revelation, he knew exactly what was happening. He came down, and our ahadith say, Imam al-Askari says, to strengthen his heart and to give him tranquility and resolve. When he came down, there was not a tree nor a stone except that it said, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah. So in these nights, as I mentioned in the beginning, everything that we do in this night, according to Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, is amplified by 60 years. Any prayer that you do, Allah rewards you as though you did it for 60 consecutive years. Any dua that you recite amplifies it as though you did it for 60 years. So this is a night that is very similar to Laylat al-Qadr in terms of its value. Now I know many of us, we have work tomorrow. I'm not saying don't sleep, but I'm saying dedicate a significant amount of your time to ibadah tonight. If you're planning on going home and continuing your favorite Netflix show, you shouldn't do that. I give your wife or the husband permission to break the television tonight if anyone turns it on. Tonight is a night of ibadah, it's a night of dua, it's a night where we have to exert ourselves a little bit because we never know. Maybe it's what we do on this night that will save us when we are deposited into our graves. Maybe it's what we do on this night that releases our necks from the fire of hell. We have to take this night seriously, and of course, do not forget your brothers and sisters in Gaza and in other parts of the world. This is a night where we have to also remember them in our du'as. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
I would like now to call Brother Hassan Pasha for recitation of Mankabat, Salwat.
Assalamu alaikum. And Shabe Miraj Mubarak to all of you. This poetry that I'm going to recite tonight, inshallah, it's a munajat written in the form of a poetry, is actually written by one of our local brothers, mashallah. And I asked, it's written in Urdu, but I asked Brother ChatGPT to translate it for us. So it's in English. And I did a little bit of tweak in there, so it makes a little bit more sense, inshallah. Salli ala Nabiyyina Salli ala Muhammadin Salli ala Shafi'ina Salli ala Muhammadin. Durud Parije Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. नबी को आज फलक فلک پر بلایا جائے گا. نبی کو آج فلک پر بلایا جائے گا. خدا کا اسم کوئی پھر بتایا جائے گا. خدا کا اسم کوئی پھر بتایا جائے گا. حضور آتے ہیں رستے میں پر بچھاؤ ملک. حضور آتے ہیں رستے میں پر بچھاؤ ملک. کہ چاند تاروں سے سجدہ کرایا جائے گا. کہ چاند تاروں سے سجدہ کرایا جائے گا. تمہارے نور سے سدرا نے کیا چمک پائی. تمہارے نور سے سدرا نے کیا چمک پائی. حبیب آج وہ تم کو بتایا جائے گا. حبیب آج وہ تم کو بتایا جائے گا. خدا کے عرش کو جی بھر کے دیکھ لو نبیوں. سجا ہے ایسے کہ پھر نہ سجایا جائے گا. سجا ہے ایسے کہ پھر نہ سجایا جائے گا. امور اسرا کے مکتب میں یہ بھی لکھا تھا. نبی کی جا پہ علی کو سلایا جائے گا. ارے نبی کی جا پہ علی کو سلایا جائے گا. یہ ایسا جشن ہے جس میں کمال عشق علی ولا کے جام میں بھر بھر پلایا جائے گا. ارے ولا کے جام میں بھر بھر پلایا جائے گا. مقطع پیش خدمت ہے. وضو خیال کا کر کے نماز عشق پڑھ پڑھو ارے وضو خیال کا کر کے نماز عشق پڑھو علی قصیدہ تمہیں خود لکھایا جائے گا ارے علی قصیدہ تمہیں خود لکھایا جائے گا نبی کو آج فلک پر بلایا جائے گا درود پڑھ لیں.
Thank you, Brother Hassan, for this beautiful recitation. We'll now take a 15-minute break. Tabarruk and chai will be served now. And then after 15 minutes, inshallah, we shall proceed to the masjid for the amal. Salawat.